Hey everybody, it's Ms. Williams, and this is transformations, what we've already done in class, and key features of a graph, which we will do next time. So this is a review from what you should have done on that worksheet in class. To get a function to move up and down, so whenever you start with a parent function, to get it to move up or down, you would need to add or subtract to the function. So to get g of x, if g of x is the new function and f of x is the parent function, if you take the parent function and you add or subtract to it, then you end up with f of x moving up, and if you subtract, f of x moves down. If you want to move the function left or right, you have to add or subtract inside the parentheses. So again, g of x here is the new function, f of x is the parent function. So if you take a number and add it inside parentheses, it's going to move it to the left. If you take a number and subtract it inside the parentheses, it's going to move it to the right. The next thing that you should have discovered when you did that worksheet was to stretch or compress vertically, and you do that by multiplying. So if your original function is f of x, and you multiply it by some number k, then it's going to affect what g of x is. And if k is a number bigger than 1, then the graph becomes skinnier and it squishes it in. If k is some number between 0 and 1, which would be a fraction or a decimal less than 1 but greater than 0, then the graph becomes fatter. So the way I remember that is fractions make it fatter. And the last thing is to get the function to flip, you have to make it negative. So if the original function is f of x, if you make it negative, it's going to give you the new function, and it will be the same function but flipped. Here's something we're going to cover the next class, so make sure you write these vocab words down. Key features of a graph. So you have the domain and range of a graph. So the domain is the x values of the graph or the input. The range is the y values of the graph or the output. An x-intercept is where the graph crosses the x-axis, and remember the x-axis is horizontal, goes left to right. The y-axis, or the y-intercept, is where it crosses the y-axis, and that goes up and down. The y-axis goes up and down. And an axis of symmetry, you probably remember this from maybe last year when we were talking about shapes, but an axis of symmetry is an imaginary line that divides the graph into exact halves that are reflections of each other. So an axis of symmetry is a line that you could fold the paper on, and when you folded the paper, the graph would actually be on top of itself. A few more key features of a graph. We have the maximum of a function, and that's the point on the graph with the highest y value. The minimum of a function is the point on the graph that has the lowest y value. Remember, y's go up and down, so the highest and lowest. And then things you also need to know about is that increasing the part of the graph where the y values are getting bigger as the x values are getting bigger. In other words, as you read the graph from left to right, the graph goes up. The part of the graph, it can be the part of the graph before a maximum point or after a minimum point. The graph would be increasing at those places. Oh, sorry. This word should be decreasing. This word right here, sorry. The part of the graph where the y values are getting smaller as the x values are getting bigger. In other words, as you read the graph from left to right, the graph goes down. It's the part of the graph after the maximum and before the minimum. So if I gave you this graph, I could ask you lots of questions about this graph as far as its key features goes. The first thing I would probably ask you is what's the domain? And the domain are the x values. And as you can see, this graph goes right to left, and it's all real numbers. There should actually be arrows at the top of these two, and that would make it all real numbers. The range, so those are your y values, and the y values take on everything high and low, so the range is all real numbers too. We'll practice some more of these in class. B right here is a local maximum. A local minimum is right here. Okay. The y-intercept is right here at point D. It's the only place it crosses the y-axis. There are 3 actual x-intercepts. One right here at C, which is -2. The second one is at D, which is 0, 0, and the third one is at E at +1. Oh, there we go. The other question I could ask you is about where's it increasing and decreasing. Well, it's increasing from negative infinity. So when you talk about where it's increasing and decreasing, you talk about the x values. It increases from negative infinity all the way till you get to here, which is about negative 1.3 or so. Then it decreases from negative 1.3 to about half, and then it'll increase from a half all the way to infinity again. All right, so we'll work some more of these on class. Make sure you have all these vocab words written down, and I will see you later.